Okay, great. Welcome to Wines Around the World. My name is Kathleen Morgan, and I'm Director of Development and Community Partnerships at Lawrence Public Library. This is our series from Retirement Boot Camp that explores different regions through wine. And tonight we will visit South Africa, which I'm really excited about. So before we get started, I am your housekeeping person as always. Give you a little quick tour of your screen. You'll want to find the chat bubble on my screen as a PC. It's at the bottom. If you click on that, a window pops up and you can type any sort of question or comment that you'd like throughout the program. And Kathy and I will monitor those to make sure that everything gets asked. If we have time at the end, we'll unmute everybody and we can ask questions live. So when we get to that point, you can wave your arms wildly or something and we'll call on you and you can unmute and we can ask questions that way as well. As far as the screen view, up in the upper right corner, there's a little button that says view. If you click on that, you have two options. One is speaker view, which makes the speaker really big and the little squares small. And that's how we'll be recorded today. And then gallery view is this kind of Brady Bunch Hollywood Squares approach to viewing the screen. So, I think those are the kind of the high points. I think I'll move on and just introduce our moderator for this evening. Kathy Hamilton is a former Journal World reporter and Channel 6 star who I always try to find something clever to say about Kathy. I'm running out of ideas because there's so much good stuff to say about her. But she is our illustrious retirement boot camp drill sergeant. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathleen, for that introduction.
Whatever you want to call it.
I want to take a quick moment and plug some of our upcoming programs just in the next week. I won't, go on and on, but next Tuesday, we are going to take our second field trip. And we're going this time to the Baker Wetlands, and we will be receiving a program inside their Discovery Center, which I did go and check out. It's a huge auditorium. They are limiting the group to 25 people, so we will be very safely spaced, distanced from one another, and there will be masks worn. But we'll get a presentation, then you're welcome to roam around the grounds. It is accessible to wheelchairs and walkers, I think, too. And it's all very flat and different terrain, but mostly pretty accessible for most people. So that is at 1:30 on Tuesday, and you should register because there is, again, the pandemic limit of 25 people, at least to be inside. So in order to do that, you go to lplks.org/retirement, click on upcoming programs, find that program, click on the title of it, and it will take you to the registration page. Did I say that right, Kathleen? Okay. Then we have on Wednesday, we have our dessert and a movie night. And that's a monthly program in which we all share a little dessert if you want to, and discuss a movie we have all seen prior to the discussion. The movie this month is called Screwball, and it's available for viewing on Canopy, which is a free streaming service with your library card. And it is about juicing or doping in Major League Baseball. I will say Kathleen and I have had strongly opposing opinions about this film, but
we a knockdown, drag out.
We both agree it is worth seeing and worth discussing. And our guest that night is Tom Keegan, who was my former colleague at the paper, at the Journal World, the sports editor there and a columnist. And he went on to the Boston Herald, and then he's currently in Muncie, Indiana. So he's going to join us on Zoom and weigh in. He actually knows one of the reporters from Miami who is in the film. So it's really interesting, everybody. I'll just say that. And next month for this program, our Wine Around the World, we're actually going to a winery in town or around town. we decided just to shake it up a little bit and do something different, meet outside at Trivedi Winery. And that is a very young local winery run by Malik Trivedi. And he is right now sort of bringing in wines from around the state to make his wines. His vineyards are very young. His grapes are, I don't even know if he has grapes yet, but anyway, he's super excited about it. There's all kinds of outdoor seating. So weather permitting, we will be doing that. And that would be on the 20th of May at 5 p.m. Okay, and without further ado, and you do register for those other two programs in the same way. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Steve Wilson, who has been with us a few times before and kicked off this program from your back deck, Steve. We think back in June, we're not sure.
I'm in, come here.
Uh-oh,
I got it on my tablet.
Cassie's in.
I got
Everybody, Cassie's in. Welcome, Cassie. Anyway, so Steve is sitting in a very gorgeous place, and he's going to tell us all about that and the two wines that he selected for this evening. So with that, Steve, take it away, please.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. So the background behind me is the actual tasting room of the first wine we'll taste, Graham Beck here. There we go. So South Africa, a little bit about South Africa, very, very, very old wine growing region. They've grown grapes here since about the mid 1600s when the Dutch East India Company settled Cape Town and neighboring Constantia. In fact, if you visit Cape Town, there is a vine sort of in a, I think it's in their what used to be the city market. But there is a vine there that was believed to be the oldest living grape, still producing grapevine in the Southern Hemisphere. I believe they've dated it to around the late 1700s. So grapes for the production of wine have been in this area for a very long time. What makes this area so compelling for me, I mean, it's spectacularly beautiful. You know, Kathy's background, that is Stellenbosch, which is about an hour and a half from Cape Town. This area is, you know, some of the oldest dirt on the planet. The continent is falling in on the ocean, so there's a lot of complex soil aside from being very old. This is also the site of one of the world's 4 floral kingdoms. So the biological diversity in this area is so extreme. There are only 4 places on the planet where it is this diverse. In fact, I was walking the vineyard one time with a winemaker, and he pointed to a bush that had these really brilliant yellow flowers, and there was a bird sitting maybe 100 yards away, and he said that bird lives off those flowers. And we walked maybe a quarter of a mile away, and he said, see that bush? That's a very similar species, but different from the one we just saw. And he pointed to another bird, and that bird lives off that bush. And those birds only live there. So this area, you know, wine is made by nature, good wine at least, and nature brings a lot to the table. So the first wine that we're going to taste is a sparkling wine, and it is made by a winery called Graham Beck. They've been around since the it's on the bottle, 1983. Their focus is making classic sparkling wine. Now, it is not permitted to refer to wine grown outside of Champagne. That's essentially, it's a trademark. Think of it that way. Champagne can only come from that very small region in France. There are some brands that have been grandfathered in, but I believe it's mid 2000s. The courts finally settled on an agreement that if you'd been using the name for a while, you can continue. And I can't recall the date. It was, I think it was mid 80s. You can continue, but otherwise you may not use that term. You can use terms that reference the production of champagne. So in the United States, you'll see a lot of bubbles that will say traditional method or method champenois. That is essentially referring back to the French style of champagne. South Africa being a very old wine growing region, they wanted their own term. So they came up with the term Cap Classique. And Cap Classique is a style that mimics the French style. And what's important about that is the way the French make champagne. I mean, aside from the soil in Champagne and the climate that really does define Champagne, they do some things that are unique to that, or at least originated in that region. One of the things they do is they the bottles are the bubbles are created inside the bottle. So it's possible to carbonate a bottle of wine and make it into sparkling wine. However, the bubbles sort of look clunky, more like seltzer bubbles. They're larger, they're clunky. When the bubbles are created through a secondary fermentation in the bottle, they become very fine. They integrate with the liquid, and you get kind of nice streams of bubbles. So that is what you're looking for. You're looking for those tiny, tiny little, stars shining in your glass. So this is, in addition to having the bubbles created through secondary fermentation in the bottle, the other very classic champagne style is to utilize primarily Chardonnay, but also Pinot Noir, and a little bit sometimes of a variant of Pinot Noir called Pinot Meunier. This particular, the Grambec Brut, is 55% Chardonnay, so fairly crisp in that. And then the Pinot, 45%, sort of rounds out the wine a little bit. The wines are made separately, so a Chardonnay, a still Chardonnay is made, and a still Pinot Noir is made. They are they are blended together, fermented and then blended together and then aged in the bottle on the dead yeast cells, which help, again, those yeast consume the sugar, which create the bubbles that get trapped in the bottle. And then, so that process, fairly labor intensive, because when you do have the yeast inside the bottle, it doesn't look very nice. It's very cloudy. So over time, the bottle is inverted and it's slowly turned, and the yeast spirals down into the neck of the bottle. I would do this, but there's liquid in it and I'd be a little wet. But the yeast sediment, this bottle is inverted and the yeast sediment collects in the neck. And then that neck is frozen in brine, and a beer crown sits on here. It gets popped, and that slug of yeast shoots out the top, essentially clarifying the liquid. So again, fairly labor-intensive process, but very few ways have been found to mimic what nature does by itself. So hopefully you have a glass in front of you. I guess we could talk real quick about glassware, because that's kind of interesting. So champagne, with everything, form follows function. And what we enjoy about champagne is its color, its beauty, its aromas. But we also need the bubbles. And so bubbles are created in the glass, where basically carbon dioxide will find imperfections in the glass and then collect there and create that stream. In fact, a lot of champagne glasses are etched, scratched on the bottom right down here, so that they deliberately release bubbles from the bottom. But over time, the first early champagne glasses were cut glass, usually colored, to sort of mask the sludge that they hadn't figured out how to clarify the wine yet, with popping out that yeast slug. So the early glasses were fairly clumsy. And then over time, they moved to, probably you've seen it, the coupe, very large glass. Well, again, form follows function. Having a large surface area allows the bubbles to escape very quickly. So while the presentation is nice, the bubbles go flat pretty quickly because you've got a lot of surface area there releasing the bubbles. And then we moved more toward the flute. Again, form follows function. The flute has, I mean, I don't know if you can see, but not a very large opening. Certainly just barely enough to get your nose into it. So if the wine is supposed to open up, we're probably not going to smell it. I mean, it looks beautiful in a flute. It looks spectacular in a flute, but it's very contained. It's very closed. You can't really smell it. So you're sacrificing aesthetics for flavor. So kind of what has evolved, if you visit fine dining restaurants now, definitely champagne glasses are either larger versions of the flute with a larger bowl, or they've actually just gone to white wine glasses, because white wine glasses actually do a very nice job. If the bubbles are very cold, they won't really release quickly. Temperature matters a lot with bubbles. Warmer bubbles will go flat quicker. But something that allows you enough space, enough head space to smell it, because champagne has sparkling wine, Cap Classique, has this sort of breadiness on the nose from that yeast that it's been spending time with. And Chardonnay has that beautiful apple note, almond note. You get a little bit of roundness from that Pinot Noir, a little berry tone. And so you really want to smell all of that. So let's take a little sip and see what we think.
I just want to remind, sorry, Steve, I just want to remind anyone, if you have any questions that come up as Steve is explaining things, go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll moderate that situation and get your questions to Steve. But I want to remind you, Steve, to talk about, I don't know how many people are enjoying a fancy charcuterie plate like I am. Not really.
Yes.
Mine is only semi-fancy at best, but please tell us what the wineries in South Africa serve for their pairing.
I can't, the national snack food of South Africa could not be, in my mind, at least, any better. It's called biltong, B-I-L-T-O-N-G, and it is essentially beef jerky. They will cure a lot of, they're trying to move away from a lot of the bush meats, but there are still farm raised, like springbok, which is sort of venison, elk-like, but they will cure that meat with a mixture of vinegar, salt, pepper, and coriander seed, and then air dry it outside. And so biltong is served everywhere. And so when you're at the winery, oftentimes you will get, they actually make a lot of cheese, and they do their own style of sausages. So they're very, very big on charcuterie. But biltong is, I mean, you'll even be driving around and see an entire store dedicated to biltong, with people crowded out there eating beef jerky. So it's wonderful, a delicious wine snack.
The money I could have saved.
Yeah, no, yeah, biltong.
Just go to the Quick Trip, you know.
Yeah, biltong is a personal favorite.
Okay, carry on. I just want to make sure you got that in.
Absolutely. So as I said, I love, this is a great producer. They really do a great job at capturing what made Champagne famous, but in a very South African way. Chardonnay, the climate in this area is Mediterranean, so it's a fairly good climate for growing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. They'll often grow those vineyards closer to the ocean, which is very, very cold, extremely cold. And so Chardonnay and Pinot both like that cooler climate. As you move away from the ocean, it gets a little warmer, but generally it's a Mediterranean climate. So most of the rain comes in the fall and the winter. The summers are fairly dry and moderate. Close to the ocean, it's actually cooler, but it's a fairly Mediterranean climate, and the grapes do very well here. So I love this wine just because I love bubbles, and I adore South Africa. But it's also sort of, I mean, it's got its own history. This is also, this particular bottle is the wine that was served when Nelson Mandela was inaugurated. And it was apparently also chosen by Obama when he was inaugurated. So Graham Beck is very happy to tell you about the presidents, foreign and domestic, who have enjoyed this wine in celebration. And I think for the money, made a $20 bottle, Cap Classique style, Chardonnay and Pinot. Beautiful bubbles, nice. So the other thing that when the wine is the secondary fermentation occurs in the bottle, those bubbles integrate. You get kind of a creamy foam, a mousse on it when you sip it, and that's all hallmarks of a great wine. So I hope you enjoy it. I love this wine. It's delicious by itself. Anything kind of salty, actually salty and fried chicken is amazing with this. Calamari, delicious also, but just a great little wine. You really don't ever need an excuse to drink bubbles.
We do have a question from Cap Gray. I just have to comment. Oh, to be on that committee that presents the presidential inauguration wines, right?
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating to look into. Okay, so Cap wants to know, how would you describe the aroma of this wine? It is, to my taste, somewhat unique.
So when the wine spends time with the yeast, it develops sort of a bready, yeasty note. So I guess on the top, I get a little bit of that. Being Chardonnay dominant, Chardonnay really favors apples and pears. I get a little green apple, little Bartlett pear on the nose. So when you kind of tie together that leesiness, that's what it's referred to, the yeastiness. The dead yeast cells are referred to as the lees, L-E-E-S. And the lees add texture and flavor, aromatics. They also flavor and aromas. They also provide durability. So it improves the ageability of the wine. Great French champagne particularly can age, decades and improve over the time, in part because it does see that lees aging. But
Cap, I'm going to ask you if that makes it. Were you tasting some of those notes that he was talking about? You have to unmute yourself now. There you go.
Yes, in my experience with bubbles, which isn't extensive, this wine is unique in a sense because it has a fruitiness to it that I'm not used to tasting in, for example, American sparkling wines and some French. Mm-hmm. But thank you. That was a good explanation for me.
Yeah, and if anybody has any, if you want to tell us what you're tasting when you take, I don't have a sample of that tonight, but I have the red. So let us know what you're tasting and we can all read it and compare notes, as it were.
Well, and I will say, the Pinot Noir, there's a little kind of a sour cherry as it finishes out. But yeah, I taste, like I said, I taste a lot of kind of lees aged Chardonnay and Pinot flavors that kind of collaborate. I really like, I mean, it's possible to have bubbles that are entirely Pinot Noir, often referred to as Blanc de Noir or white of blacks. Blanc de Blanc is all Chardonnay. I typically, personally, I like a lot. I like Blanc de Blanc. I like that racy kind of green apple note, very minerally. But this has a nice. This is more of a traditional blend that you would see from France.
Okay, so Maggie and Dave Smith want to know, do you swish bubbles in your mouth like other wines when you taste?
Yeah, I do. And I also, I don't, I guess it's probably a tick. I swirl everything. So I will try to not swirl as much on my bubbles because it takes the bubbles out of them. But yeah, I always like to chew a wine because the mouth is randomly distributed with taste buds, and it really, it's just hedging your bets. You don't know where certain taste buds are going to fall and how it's going to register. So just hit them all.
Okay, and Jack wants to know, do they make grappa at the winery from the lease?
Grappa, different winemaking waste product. The lees is just the dead yeast cells. I guess it sort of looks like, I don't know. It settles to the bottom of the tank or the bottle. When it's stirred up, it makes the wine look very milky. So that's the lees. I think for what you're talking about is the production of grappa, which grappa is made with, after you press the grapes, the remaining seeds and stems and skins get well, let me say, when you're pressing wine grapes, you don't really want to grind them into dust, because the more you press, the more bitter components get brought out of the seeds and the stems and the skins. So oftentimes the pressing for the juice for the wine production is fairly moderate. If you take that what is called pumice, it's the remnants of the pressing, and you press it again, you will still get some sugars that are fermentable, and then that is distilled into what's called grappa. And grappa is both good and bad. When grappa is good, it really is spectacular. When it's bad, it's like drinking gas. It's very high proof, but yeah, good grappa. I have struggled. Several years ago, we had a great, the grappa is very popular in Piedmont in northern Italy, and we had a great supplier for grappa from Piedmont, and that's pretty much dried up. I wish we could get some good grappa, but it's just not available in Kansas right now. So I will say it's likely that there are producers in South Africa that will make grappa, just because that is a traditional thing to, waste not, want not. What is more popular here are dessert wines. In fact, there's a winery that still exists. We actually sell their red wine. It's called Klein Costanza, actually in Dutch it's clean, but we would say Klein. Costanza, which is Costanza is a suburb of Cape Town, and Napoleon, right before he went off to jail, the wine that he requested was the dessert wine that Klein Costanza makes. So a lot of late harvest dessert wines where the grapes get very, very ripe, high sugar, and then fermented to a point where still a fair amount of sugar remains. But that's a very common thing. Dessert wines, I guess through history, they have become very popular in South Africa.
Okay, another question from Cap, and then we probably should move on to the red. When pouring sparkling wine, do you pour in a two-stage process? That is, do you pour half a glass, let the bubbles, froth subside, then pour the remaining portion?
That actually is I mean, you can get away with one pour, but when you're taught to pour bubbles, that actually is the proper way. You pour essentially an amount to catch the second one, because you really don't want, the goal is to keep as much of the carbonation in the wine as you can as you put it in your glass. When you're opening a bottle of wine and you hear that loud pop, sadly, while very celebratory, sadly, much of the bubbles have just exited the building. And your wine is soon to go flat. So when opening a bottle of bubbles, you actually want to hold the cork. Well, you want to hold the cork to keep it from flying out, but you want to just kind of let it. The French would say you want it to sigh, just a little. But that is in pouring. Yeah, you're really trying to contain the bubbles. So a 2-stage pour is a good way.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let's move.
Uh-oh, late question. Now that we've opened the sparkling wine, this is a good question. How long will it last in the fridge?
Sadly, it's a very short time.
So what you're saying is they better slug it down?
Yeah. The red will hold much longer. But there is a device, and I don't own one myself, but I really like them. We use a lot. They're used commonly by our distributors. Is a and I think they sell them for a couple $3 on Amazon, but it's a stopper that is sort of the reverse of what some people might use to seal their red wine or their white wine. Instead of removing air, it actually pushes air in. So you stick the stopper in, and then kind of wings clamp down on the neck of the bottle, and then you actually pump in a little bit of air, and the pressure keeps the bubbles from being released. Even though it's not CO2, it holds that pressure. And those stoppers actually work quite well. I mean, there are a lot of kind of, I mean, I think there was something about sticking a long, slender teaspoon in there. There's some, none of that has actually worked. But this stopper that does replace, the air and pressurize the bottle, it does hold it a couple, 3 days.
Okay, real quick, John, I've asked you to unmute. John just showed us a stopper. Is that the stopper of which he speaks?
Yes.
That's the one?
We got a domain Shandong in California.
Napa Valley.
Does it have the pump on the top?
No pump. Just
Yeah. So
it's got a rubber seal, and you just seal it around the.
Yeah. So those
The edges come out.
those work very well. And that was my preferred choice until I saw this new one, which essentially is that plus a little button on the top that you can add air. And so it holds it down, and it keeps it, because that's the problem. You really need a good seal, and those little wings do that very well. But if you can just put a little air in it, and the bubbles really, I mean, they have no place to go. So they stay in there longer. But yeah, that if you're not able to find the one with the pump, that's the stopper you want.
And it works
Okay.
very well.
Yep.
Great, thank you, John. I saw it and I just wanted to, so maybe Steve, you can share a link to a product similar to what you're talking about, and I can send it out.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on, because we're about at 5:40 now.
All right. So one of the styles of wine that does very well in South Africa is the style that is popularized by the Rhone Valley. So the southern Rhone Valley in France is famous for a handful of grapes, actually more than a dozen, but primarily Syrah, Grenache, and then other grapes like Mourvedre, which in Spain they call Monastrell, Sanso, Cunoise, Carignan. They're all grapes that provide different things in their blends. The Côte de Rhone is a blend that has a lot of complexity created by all of these grapes. And South Africa does very well with Rhone style varietals. So this wine is David Finlayson is a winemaker, really talented guy. He has worked in Australia in the Barossa. He actually worked at the very, 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 very famous Chateau Margaux in France, in Bordeaux. He owned a winery that he has since sold called Glen Carlew, which was also in South Africa. And now he makes wine just under his own name, David Finlayson, and this is his wine, the Pepper Pot. Pepper Pot is a blend, mostly Syrah, and the Syrah, that's, you get that rich black cherry, plum, black pepper spice, Mourvedre adding a little more texture and color, Tannat adding more tannin and structure. Again, that Grenache little juiciness really creates a beautiful wine. You get a lot of fruit. Again, you get that black pepper spice. This does not see any oak, so all of the smells that you're getting, the aromas are coming from the grapes and from the process of fermenting those grapes. This wine is I love these wines. Probably the wine that got me really into wine was Côte de Rhone, because it was just so interesting. It goes well with so many different foods, and if there's one thing that you can do to make your wine enjoyment better, have it with food. So many wines just make food sing. The food makes the wine sing. But this one, the style is just so versatile. Yeah, really nice stone fruits, plum and cherry. I mean, even a little peach muted there, but really nice stone fruits, peppery spice, good tannic structure, drying. That probably the Tannat. Tannat is a French grape, also called Durif. I'm sorry, not called Durif. Tannat is French grape from the south of France. Very intense, very thick skin. Gives a lot of structure to this wine. Yeah, there are a lot of producers who grow Syrah and Grenache. There at Bordeaux varietals like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc definitely have their place here, and they do some outstanding stuff. But really, Grenache and Syrah, given the climate and the soil, they really just stand out. I've always been impressed with their wines. Now, I will say there are two wines that have been on the international market. I mean, as I said, South Africa has been making wine since the mid 1600s. Most of the export historically has gone to Europe. I mean, if you go into the average English grocery store, you see a lot of South African wines. The English love South African wine, so a lot of it does end up there. But in the early 90s, mid 90s, South Africa made a fairly concerted effort to introduce the United States to South African wines, and they did it with a red wine called Pinotage and a white wine called, well, they call it Steen, S-T-E-E-N, Steen, or we would call it Chenin Blanc, or the French would call it Chenin Blanc. But Chenin Blanc and Pinotage became kind of their ambassadors. And I've had some amazing Pinotage and Chenin Blanc, but probably not as great as I've had Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and the Rhone varietals. I don't know if I would say that if I were picking ambassadors that I would pick those. Pinotage, it's actually a hybrid that was created at the University of Stellenbosch between Pinot Noir, very juicy, ripe, cherry-driven wine, and Cinsault, which the French also referred to as Hermitage. So they crossed the two, and if you're in South Africa, every winery has at least one Pinotage, and taste it. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. You smile, you move on. But yeah, I think for the value wines, their Rhone varietals are outstanding.
Okay, well, we can, if you have any comments or questions or want to just, oh, we do have Scott's got one. Okay, so Scott asks, is China's current SNIT snit with Australia and turning to South African wines affecting price of South African wines?
Unfortunately, South Africans wineries are in not a good space. I've talked to friends down there, and unfortunately, when COVID hit, South Africa unfortunately does have issues with alcoholism, and the hospitals are pretty well stocked with people dealing with detox on an average time on an average day. And when COVID hit, the government actually mandated that all breweries, distilleries, and wineries shut down completely, and that alcohol was no longer legal to sell. So the wineries right now are struggling. I mean, they've had 2 or 3 years of fairly ugly drought. I guess 18 was horrible. In fact, I was down there the day that they were supposed to have 0 day, which was the day that Cape Town was officially out of water. Fortunately, they managed through a really successful public awareness campaign to extend their water supply. But between drought and COVID, the South African industry is really struggling. I don't know that any external factors really would. I mean, it's a raging fire. I don't know what would make it worse right now. I am concerned. I think probably when COVID is over, there will be fewer wineries in South Africa. The good thing is they'll be replaced by somebody else, but the bad thing is they may be friends of ours.
Yeah.
But
Wow. Okay, so on another note, you said, the wine makes the food sing and vice versa. What foods would you suggest serving with this wine?
The great thing about this style of wine is it really is very versatile. I mean, it loves chicken, it loves beef, it loves pork, it loves vegetables, it loves pasta with red sauce. It loves a lot of these wineries have, if you're visiting, have pizza ovens. It loves pizza. That's just it. It really that's its appeal to me. There's almost nothing that, I mean, a burger, meatloaf, a steak, barbecued chicken. Now, I mean, if you happen to have some they refer to it as their barbecue. The South Africans barbecue. They refer to it as braai, BRAI, and to have a good braai is a good. I mean, I don't know if they love it the way Kansas City loves it, but they love barbecuing. So they will they do eat a lot of beef. They do eat. It's not technically bush meat. It is farmed meat, but springbok, which is a very amazingly delicious, very lean red meat. They do eat a lot out of the ocean. This probably wouldn't be. I would probably say a Western Cape Sauvignon Blanc would do better, but they do eat a lot of seafood. But no, this style of wine is so versatile.
Steve, you didn't mention beef jerky once.
Oh, well,
in that long list.
Everything goes with beef jerky, though. everything goes with beef jerky.
I'm going to order up some beef jerky for the outing.
In fact, it's funny. Where you are now, between the background of Kathy's frame and Cape Town, there's a spectacular biltong store. I mean, it's wall to wall biltong, and of all different kinds. And there's a gentleman, I think they may dry it in like a tenderloin kind of thing, because they have a machine that makes these tiny little chips. And no, it's a thing. They're big on beef jerky. It's such a welcoming thing to see beef jerky on the table when you show up.
I love that idea. Okay, so Cap has a question. Some Petite Syrah wines are dense and jammy, while this one is not. It seems somewhat lighter wine than what I have experienced. What is your preferred, you, Steve, what is your preferred style of Syrah?
So actually, Syrah and Petite Syrah are different grapes. I misspoke earlier. Durif is the French grape of Petite Syrah. I confused that for Tannat, but Petite Syrah is Durif. It's actually separate grape. But to your point, Syrah and Grenache both can be made very jammy, and usually that is an indicator of the climate. For example, they grow a lot of Petite Syrah right around Sacramento in the Sacramento River Delta, and it's fairly warm there. It's fairly dry, and the Petite Syrah rather, gets fairly ripe. So as the grape produces sugars, you have to do something with those sugars. You can either ferment them or leave them in the wine. And oftentimes it's kind of a 50-50. They ferment most of it, or actually probably 70-30. They ferment most of it, but some of the sugar remains, and that gives it that jammy quality. The climate here, I will say, I've had rich Syrah, but I don't think I've ever had a wine from South Africa that I can remember being truly jammy. I mean, the climate is just too cool. It's not as, yeah, I would say it's probably, jammy would not be a style that I would associate with South African wines. Definitely more California. For Grenache, there are areas of southern Spain that make fairly jammy Grenache, but even if you go to the northern parts of Spain, it gets a little lighter just because it's cooler temperature. So I would say it's mostly a climate issue.
Okay. Well, does anyone have any comments to make on either of these two wines? We can unmute everybody. So you can weigh in. I think everybody should just unmute themselves. Maybe that might be easier
that might
for
be easier.
everybody.
I guess my question is, I really love the peppery part of this wine. Are there other wines that you would recommend that are kind of peppery reds?
Syrah and Grenache based reds. That pepperiness. I mean, if you think about it, every flavor is a chemical formula. And one of the things that makes wine so intriguing to humans, has for millennia, is that a certain family of grapes, primarily the family of Vitis vinifera, and all of the grapes rather that we've had today are part of the vinifera family. But vinifera vines, vinifera grapes have this amazing ability to mimic like a parrot. Every different, all sorts of different types of fruits and spices and flavors, and that black pepper note is a natural occurrence.
Okay. Yeah, John, where are you? Oh, okay. Hi, go ahead and ask your question. I'm just going to open up the mics for people.
Okay. We noticed that maybe we had this chilled a little too much because we got it kind of late and we stuck it in the refrigerator. It seemed to be better when it was warmed a bit. So is there an ideal temperature? And my second question is, since I love Prosecco, how do you compare the Beck with the Prosecco from Italy?
So the first question is, temperature very much affects the wine. Oftentimes people refer to as serve wine at room temperature. Sort of misleading, because that rule was invented before central air. So room temperature really is closer to the low to mid 60s. You want a wine cool. I mean, in a general sense, we all in the United States, we serve our reds way too warm and our whites way too cold. Sparkling wine always needs to be cold if you want to keep it sparkling. White wine, however, it really doesn't want to be you know, refrigerator temperature, 40, 39 degrees. It really doesn't want to be that. It wants to be closer to the high 40s, low 50s. And basically as a wine warms, it is more volatile. So when the aromas kind of get loose in the air, that happens as it warms up, and you want that. So I would say, you know, again, my preference for a wine like this, I actually put my bottle outside. I wanted it about 65 degrees. And that really it's a nice point. The alcohol doesn't evaporate as fast, so it stays kind of under the rug, and you get more of the fruit. So hopefully that answers the first question. The second question, Prosecco. So Prosecco is made with primarily with a grape called Glera, Glera, and oftentimes it has a little more residual sugar in the wine, so it's a touch sweeter. This is a Brut style wine, so Brut means you should not perceive a lot of sugar. It is a dry style of wine, and so I'd say this is drier. Prosecco typically is also not aged on the lees. It is fermented in a large tank, but the yeast sediment is not created it is not kept in contact. They don't want bready, yeasty, leesy Prosecco. They want it more crisp. Yeah, I would say that in this style, you're definitely, anytime you see method champenois, traditional method, or Cap Classique, you're gonna get more of those yeast notes, those bready notes. That should be expected. But yeah, Prosecco typically, there are some that do see lees aging, but the vast majority do not.
Okay, and Shelley, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. You said with climate change, is that changing? Is what changing? Can you clarify for me?
I had he mentioned that wineries weren't doing well, and I'd heard that because of climate change and their droughts, the climate of the areas is changing, and they're not they're having to move further south, I guess, and there's no
Right.
further south to go.
Okay, yeah. So I guess in addition to the troubles with the pandemic and the cultural alcoholism, is the climate change sort of piling on down there?
I will say, as long as I've spent in the wine industry, I see climate change happening all over the world. It was never a myth to our industry. It was never a controversy. It was a this is what's happening thing. South Africa is sort of unique. So, for example, I was down there in 2018. And again, I think it was the end of June, early July, but it was to be 0 day, the day that particularly the metropolis of Cape Town was running out of water. And part of that was, I don't know how you would divide it up, but a significant amount of that was in fact climate change. However, there was a president who had been elected, I think it was 2014, President Zuma. And Zuma kind of ran on a reformer thing, but he was not
going to be able to do it on this.
He was not a reformer. And in fact, he mothballed several water desalinization plants, and he deferred development of a large dam that would have served Cape Town. So yes, there was an extreme drought in 17 and 18, but it was exacerbated by politics, local politics. Zuma did a lot of bad things for the South African country in not planning for a drought that they were expecting.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Steve? Either, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and unmute because it is sort of that time.
Unmute yourselves. It's probably
Unmute
faster.
yourselves so we can give Steve a big round of applause. And I will, in the meantime, while you're doing that, remind you that we'll be doing wine around Kansas at Trivedi Winery next month on May 20th. So,
It looks like Dave
Dave
Smith.
has a question.
Yeah, I just want to know, do any wineries amend their soil to get a certain flavor of wine, or do they just take what they get?
In South Africa, actually, it's the answer is definitely no in South Africa, simply because let me see if I don't know whether there is a and I don't see them on either of these bottles, but as I mentioned before, much of South Africa's wine industry is in a floral kingdom, and so they are required by law to be overly sensitive to what they grow and where they grow it. Their expanding vineyards is not generally allowed, simply because it disrupts the natural flow of things. I mean, there are plenty of wineries who have actually spent significant monies allowing their vineyards to go back to they call it Fynbos, Fynbos, but it's sort of a exotic scrubland. So most of the Western Cape, most of the wine industry sits in this floral kingdom and in the Fynbos, and so they would not be allowed to amend their soil. I mean, they will do cover crops to they'll plant things to replace nitrogen and things like that in the soil, but they could not bring in other soil. And actually, I mean, as a broader question, unfortunately, if you think about how much soil it requires to, plant a large raised bed in your backyard, it might be desirable to amend the soil, but it would be cost prohibitive. The best wine, I mean, and this soil and this climate, I mean, there are very few similar climates and soils in the world rather than there are here. So this is some of the oldest dirt on the planet, and the complexity of that soil kind of translates into the wine.
Okay, thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, I have a question about, can you shut yours off? Just mute. Okay. If you're trying to have, are you mute? What are we echoing from? If you have wines that you're planning on consuming within several years, and they look at temperature for storage versus wines that you might be trying to store for an extended period of time, is there a difference at where you need to be at temperature wise in order to allow you to go ahead and keep a wine for a longer period of time? And what temperature would the first one be where it's fairly upcoming consumption versus something that's long?
So we keep our store in the summertime, well, actually year round. We keep our store between 69 and 70 degrees. That is pretty good for storing wine in the short term. If you're going to store it longer than a year or two, well, even longer than that, I would say up to 3 years. If you're going to store it longer than 3 years, you probably would want to have a cooler temperature. My cellar is about 55 degrees, and I have to help it maintain a relative humidity of about 70%. Essentially, what you're doing is, I mean, there's a reason that wine cellars are in caves. They're 55 degrees and 70% humidity year round, constant. So the 55, I mean, at 52, your wine kind of goes to sleep. And if you have a wine that's, you know, what we would call a trophy wine, something that is, you know, maybe even an asset class, you would want to keep it at about 52 degrees and 70% humidity. So the cork stays moist and the wine goes to sleep. If you're keeping it for 5 to 10 years, somewhere between 55 and 60 would probably be ideal. But even if it's warmer than that, the biggest issue is the cork drying out. So having more humidity in the air would be ideal.
Okay. Right. Thank you for that. Thanks for the question. Thanks for all of your questions and all of your comments. I guess we'll wrap it up at that. It's 6:05. And everybody's got to drink all that bubbly. So, you know, hope you're not driving anywhere.
Yeah, that's the benefit of this.
Use it or lose it, as they say.
That's right.
But anyway, thanks so much, everybody, for hopping on the Zoom tonight, and enjoy the wine. Steve, again, thank you as always.
Thank you
For your
Amazing.
expertise and your travel
Thank you.
experience. And yeah, there's your applause.
Thank
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Night.
I'm out, I'm out, I'm out.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Oh, Cassie's out. You made an entrance and you're making an exit.